Sup everyone. So, not that long ago, I was browsing a streaming service, and I was looking for something to put on in the background, as one does, and I spotted Death Note. And it's a show that I'd already seen a bunch of times, but I figured, what the hell, I'll put it on again. So, I put it on, thinking this is just something that I'll have on in the background while I'm working on something else, but instead, I found myself focusing on it again, and getting into it again, and before I knew it, I had watched like the first 10 episodes of the show again. And it dawned on me that I've done this with Death Note multiple times in my life, where I've put it on, not intending to watch more than an episode or two, and wound up watching a slew of them in a row. There's something addicting about Death Note. It's accessible in a way that's notable to me. You can just slide into watching it very, very easily. And it made me ponder the question that is the premise of this video. Is Death Note the perfect starter anime? And after thinking about it, I determined that you could make a very compelling case that it is. Now, when I say starter anime, I don't mean is Death Note the first anime that every anime fan should watch? Because to me, the first anime show you should watch is probably whatever is super popular at the time that your friends are also into. That way, if nothing else, you can have fun talking with them about the show that you're watching. That's how it was with me. The first anime I ever watched was Dragon Ball Z, because my friends were obsessed with it, and I wound up getting into it too, and the rest is history. But let's say you know someone who's not a kid anymore, who for some reason never watched anime, the craze totally passed them by, and you'd like to get them into anime because you believe they could be converted into a fan if they only saw the right show. In that scenario, I believe Death Note might be the perfect anime to recommend to that hypothetical newcomer. Because while Death Note might not be the greatest anime show ever, it might be the most watchable, if that distinction makes any sense. It's something you can form a connection with right away. And this show might not be the best thing for everybody, since everyone's tastes are different, of course. But if I had to generalize, and I had to pick one show as like a blanket suggestion for someone who is late to the genre, Death Note would be way up there. And to explain why I feel this way, I'm going to give you 5 reasons why Death Note might be the perfect starter show for an anime newcomer. I'm copying the template from my previous video essays, which you should also watch, because it's a very easy way for me to organize my thoughts. Alright. Reason number 1, why Death Note might be the perfect starter anime. It's short. Death Note is only 37 episodes long, and the reason this matters is because if you look at a list of the first anime shows that many people get into, a lot of them are shonen fighting shows that people get hooked on when they're a kid. Shows like Naruto and Bleach and so on. And the thing with those shows is that a lot of them are really, really long. And it can be intimidating to go near those franchises if you've never watched anime before. Like, I love the Dragon Ball franchise as much as you can, but the thing with Dragon Ball is that if you recommend it to someone, you're asking them to consume decades of material, just as you'd have to do with One Piece and Naruto and Bleach and so on. And the best parts of that material, to a lot of people, might not come until dozens or even hundreds of episodes into it. Those shows are a big commitment. You have to dedicate months and months of your life to get through them, which naturally becomes less attractive the older you get. Whereas with Death Note, 37 episodes is not that hard to get through. Death Note is very digestible. You can plow through it and finish it and have a complete assessment of it in a week or two. And you can't say that about a lot of other big popular shonen shows. Reason number 2, it has a great concept that's easy to follow along with. Death Note, as I'm sure you already know, is about a teenager named Light Yagami who one day discovers a notebook that was dropped into the human world by a god of death named Ryuk. And as the name implies, if you write someone's name in the notebook, they die. And the story is about Light trying to get away with using the notebook to kill off all the criminals in the world without getting caught by the police and, specifically, a young detective named L. In other words, there is a magical element to the story, but the magical element is an object. Everyone from the human world is just a regular person like us, and the object is super easy to understand. And so, there's no real learning curve to this show. It's a concept that you can summarize in a single sentence. It's a concept that could just as easily work in a genre outside of anime. And that makes it appealing if you're new to anime, because you can put yourself in Light's situation without feeling like you need to download tons and tons of information to comprehend what's happening. You don't need to learn anything about the world Light is in because it's a contemporary world that's meant to be just like ours. In fact, in the first episode of Death Note, Light and Ryuk are almost the only characters you even see. You don't see the police, you don't see L, you don't see Light's dad or sister, you don't have to care about any of Light's classmates or teachers, you don't have to care about any of Light's friends. Light talks to his mom for about 30 seconds, and other than that, it is only Light and Ryuk that you have to care about for the entirety of the first episode. The show clears the deck to make it very, very easy for someone to come on board to the story. When Light discovers the Death Note, he's discovering its existence at the same time we are. He learns how it works when we do, and he learns about gods of death when we do. We are following this story at the same time that Light is, and that helps to make us invested in a situation, even if we don't agree with how he's handling it. The other thing about this concept that works is that because Light is killing people the whole time, part of the intrigue of the show is wondering just how much of his morality he's willing to sacrifice. Like, from the get-go, you gather that Light is an egomaniac and that his sense of morality is rather questionable, but what he's doing is, in theory, a good thing. And so, the whole time you're watching Death Note, you're constantly asking yourself how good a person he really is, or if you should even like him at all. And that is a very unique dynamic that you don't get from a lot of anime shows, in which the main character is an anti-hero who is less morally pure than the people going after him. And the ultimate accomplishment of this show is that even though Light is, let's just say, a very flawed individual, you also can't help but root for him. You want him to succeed, but you don't want him to succeed. He's a bad guy, but you also want the closure of seeing all his machinations work out. Death Note, to me, is kind of like Breaking Bad in that while the premise of it is self-indulgent, it never tips so far into watching a completely unlikable person just hurting people that you're never interested in what the main character is doing. Even if, the whole time you're watching him, you're acknowledging that he probably doesn't deserve to have good things happen to him. Light Yagami is not a great guy, but he's an interesting guy, and it's fun to see the cat and mouse game between him and L, even if we don't like where it's going. And that's what wins out. Reason number 3, it's produced fantastically. One of the things that makes Death Note so unique is that it looks and sounds different from virtually any other anime you will ever see. It's not just that Death Note has a great soundtrack, and it's not just that it looks good, even if the art has aged a bit. It's that this show has a style and a flair to it. This show is constantly putting spectacle in front of you. The music in Death Note is heavy and powerful. When Light and L are thinking to themselves, they're cast in a different color to thematically distinguish themselves. When Light is contemplating doing something wicked, his eyes turn red. When he and L are considering their next move, they imagine that they're facing off against each other from the top of a building. Death Note is like an anime soap opera. Some of this is not subtle, but it's not trying to be subtle. It wants you to bathe in the gravity and the seriousness of what's happening. And it tries as hard as it can to make every scene feel incredibly important. The ultimate example of this is when you see Light writing in the Death Note. Any other anime would depict someone writing in a notebook with a pen as like the dullest, most mundane thing possible. They wouldn't even focus on it. But this show goes in the opposite direction and animates Light's pen strokes with the energy and excitement that you'd get from like a Zack Snyder film. It has speed ups and zoom ins and dramatic lighting, and the camera's even shaking a bit. When you see the first montage of Light using the Death Note and killing people, that is probably one of the most memorable scenes in all of anime, and that's because there's nothing else quite like this. Death Note is a great example of how much excellent production value can elevate a show. Because at the end of the day, this is a show in which you watch people talk, and occasionally someone writes something in a notebook. In a vacuum, none of that sounds particularly exciting. But by dressing everything up, and by making every element of this show pop, it's never boring. For all the complaints that you could give about Death Note, the one thing you can't say is that it's boring. And that baseline of watchability, along with its distinctiveness, is what makes this such a great nominee to be the perfect starter anime for someone. I'll also note, too, that Death Note has a fantastic English dub. And that's important because if you know anything about anime fans, then you know that anime fans can be rather picky when it comes to dubs. And they love to debate the ever-loving crap out of them. But Death Note has one that pretty much everyone agrees is excellent, which means that you don't have to put a qualifier in your recommendation for how you watch the show. And that's a nice added bonus. Reason number 4, it has a very fast pace. I'm not going to spoil Death Note beyond the first episodes because that would defeat the purpose of this video, but it's good to think about how much ground is covered over just the first 3 episodes of the series. By the end of the first episode, Light has already used the Death Note and declared that he wants to be a god. By the end of the second episode, they've not only introduced L, but established that L has already figured out Light's approximate location. And by the end of the third episode, they show that Light is being followed by an FBI agent who's watching him from outside his house. Death Note moves really, really quickly in the beginning. A different show with the same premise would have had Light spending a lot of time deliberating on the ethics of using the Death Note, or they would have gone out of its way to try to goose up Light's backstory by giving him a tragic upbringing or a super righteous reason to use the Death Note or whatever. Or they'd show him toiling with the guilt about what he's doing and if it's all right for him to continue this. But this series does not do that at all. Light uses this notebook with practically no hesitation. He never second guesses his decision. He never quells on the morality of what he's doing. After like 10 seconds of doubt in the first episode, he's all in. And in fact, he's so all in that it's the only part of his character that matters. From the moment he finds this notebook, it consumes his entire existence. Light doesn't care about friends, he doesn't care about girls, he doesn't care about school, he only cares about this notebook. And because the show establishes that this notebook is his everything, they waste as little time as possible on anything about him other than the action surrounding him, which makes it easy to get hooked on this story because the story doesn't slow down for a really long time. There's always a new obstacle in front of Light. There's always something new that he has to deal with. And again, all of this is optimal if you're new to anime and on the fence about watching these kind of shows to begin with, because Death Note has a way quicker pace than the average anime show, and there's way less waiting involved to get to the best parts. You only need to watch an episode or two to know if Death Note is up your alley. And that's not the case with a lot of other anime shows. I can think of plenty of anime shows where, in my opinion, it'd be unfair to judge it off of not even its first 2 or 3 episodes, but its first 20 episodes. And there are even anime shows that I won't mention where fans will legitimately go, no, you gotta wait until episode 200. That's when things really get good. But with Death Note, that's not the case. With Death Note, there's so much compacted into the early episodes that you can make a fair assessment of it pretty early on. If you're not hooked by the 3rd or 4th episode of Death Note, I can safely say it's probably not for you. But if you are hooked by the 3rd episode, there's no way you're not going to watch the whole series. And number 5, the final reason why Death Note might be the perfect starter anime, it's fun to talk about with people. As weird as this might sound, this to me is one of the best reasons for an anime newcomer to start with Death Note, and I'll tell you why. If you're a seasoned anime fan and you're watching this video, you might have thought to yourself at some point in this video, I can think of better anime shows than Death Note. I can think of a way better show to give to someone. And maybe you can. Maybe you're thinking of a Cowboy Bebop or a Mob Psycho or a Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood or something. And hey, those shows are great. But the thing is, there's only so much you can say to people about those shows. Whereas with Death Note, you can have a whole conversation with someone about where did Light go wrong? What should he have done differently? Can you believe that this happened? Can you believe that that happened? And so on. Death Note, as good as it is also kind of trashy. It's also kind of ridiculous at points. There are moments in it that stand out in it for being really over the top. Like this classic moment, for instance.
I'll take a potato chip and eat it.
See, that's great because that right there is a conversation starter. That's something that you can bond with other people about because you can go, I can't believe there's a moment in this show when Light dramatically eats a potato chip. It's the reason this show produced a ton of memes that have endured throughout the years, because there's all these moments in it that stand out for being so unusual and different from what you'd ever get from another anime show. And so, if someone is starting out as a brand new anime watcher, I think Death Note is kind of perfect for them because whether they like the show or not, they're going to at least be able to talk about it. And that's what's fun, and that's where you can really reel someone in as an anime fan, because it creates a conversation. I don't believe that the perfect starter anime needs to necessarily be the greatest possible show that someone can watch in that moment, so much as I believe that it should be something that they find interesting and can formulate an opinion on. And that's where Death Note is great. It's weird, it's different, it's polarizing, and it will never not be relevant. I'm recording this video decades after this show came out, and it is still a show that if you ask a huge anime fan if they've ever seen it, the odds that they're going to say yes is extremely high. Case in point, when The Simpsons made their first ever parody segment of an anime show, they parodied Death Note, and they did it 16 years after Death Note came out. And so, this show is a very easy gateway to anime fandom. If you watch Death Note, you have watched a show that you can now connect to with an enormous percentage of serious anime fans. And there's something to be said for that. And again, this is not to say that Death Note is a perfect show or that there aren't things to potentially dislike about it. Beyond that this type of show just might not be up someone's alley, since this is a show in which people die almost every episode. The biggest problem I have with Death Note, without explicitly spoiling anything, is that something happens in the show that makes the show less interesting than it was before. And if you've seen the show, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you might agree with me that even though this show has a great final episode, Death Note loses a lot of its magic in the build-up to it. But again, that's just one more thing that you can talk about with people. Death Note is nothing if not stimulating. It is a show that you can dissect and analyze and criticize and enjoy. Because like I said earlier, for all the fluff around this show, there's something about the first 10 or so episodes of this series that make it incredibly easy to watch. Death Note has a unique combination of elements that make it very well suited for someone who hasn't gotten into anime yet. And if you are a major anime fan, it's probably not a coincidence that you've already seen this show.